Indeed, Leanne. And of course, earlier, just a little while ago, we spoke to the SACP's first Deputy General Secretary, Mapaila, regarding the Secretariat of the Tripartite Alliance rejecting the idea of South Africa approaching the Bretton Woods institutions for funding. Now, the new development bank, or the BRICS Bank, as it is also colloquially known, has announced that it is fully committed to supporting member countries during this period to fight the spread of COVID-19 and stands ready to provide necessary financing. And Mapaila said that they may be more amenable to that option. But some economists have said that the Fitch decision to downgrade South Africa with a negative outlook underscores the urgent need for Finance Minister Tito Mboweni to urgently table a new budget immediately after the lockdown period. So joining us now via Skype is the Director and Chief Economist of Efficient Group, Dawie Roodt. Welcome to the show this morning, Dawie.
Good morning to you, Sakina.
So, Dawie, first and foremost, from your perspective, what are the concerns here about the Bretton Woods institutions? Because South Africa is in need of urgent funding. And I asked this question to Mapaila as well. Looking at our current economic dilemma, does it really matter, also in light of the coronavirus outbreak, where South Africa goes to for the funding at this stage?
I think there's something that most people are misunderstanding here. If you go to these international institutions like the BRICS Bank or the IMF or the World Bank, it doesn't really matter, and you borrow money from them, you get dollars mostly. Of course, sometimes they've got funny names like special drawing rights and so on, but essentially is that you are borrowing dollars. So if you are borrowing dollars, you want to spend dollars on something. Now, typically what we could do is go and borrow $1 billion, say, for example, and use this money to import medical equipment that we may need. But we don't need that kinds of money to import medical equipment, for example. We have in excess of $50 billion at the South African Reserve Bank in the form of official reserves. We are in no need of dollars. We are certainly in need of rands. Because the tax collections are coming under tremendous pressure, the fiscal deficit will simply balloon and explode. But we do not need dollars. And I can't understand why people keep on saying that we need to go to international institutions to borrow dollars. We are in need of rands and not of dollars. And that's something that the government has been doing very well in recent years, that they borrowed relatively small amounts of money in dollars. And that means that if we have to repay these loans, which will fall due over a number of years only, there are at the moment more than sufficient dollars at the South African Reserve Bank in order to repay these kind of loans. So I just don't understand this. People keep on hammering on our need to go and borrow dollars. That's not the problem. The problem is we are in need of rands, and the taxpayers simply cannot carry this burden anymore.
So if that is so clear, and it would seem that you are in agreement with the Alliance Secretariat in this regard about where the money should come from, how much do we actually need for starters to actually address the problems that we have right now?
I think it's important to understand is that the fiscal accounts were in very, very deep trouble before the virus hit. We had a budgeted fiscal deficit of 6.8% to GDP expected by the Minister of Finance. And now, based on my calculations, the undercollection in taxes is likely to be around about 200 billion or so below the budgeted estimates. That means that the fiscal deficit is going to be in the region of 12% or so of GDP, depending, of course, on the size of the economy. So the Minister of Finance, his numbers are simply not going to add up. And I do agree. I think it's perhaps not a bad idea if the Minister of Finance tables a new budget so that we can see what is going on. But the state finances were bad before, and they've deteriorated quite dramatically and will deteriorate quite dramatically over the next couple of months and so on. And we can talk about a fiscal deficit, like I've mentioned, well into the double figures relative to GDP and a massive undercollection in terms of the various taxes. And that means that the state simply does not have the capacity to do what many other countries are doing, and that is allowing for huge stimulus packages to support the economy. We just don't have the money. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of rand shortage.
So this tabling of a special budget introducing, one would imagine, as most would want, drastic economic reforms, is that a possibility, one? And two, what would you expect the minister to table in that budget?
Certainly it can be done. I guess the Minister of Finance can revise his budget anytime. It is a law, basically, so you can get Parliament to pass a new law. I don't think there's any practicality stopping that. But it's certainly the first step of the Minister of Finance, and I think we have to keep on saying this, and we have to emphasize this all the time. The Minister of Finance must do something about state spending. The state spends far too much money. Now, I've done some calculations, and I can tell you that we're probably going to lose in the region of about a million jobs this year. 1 million people are going to lose their jobs. We're talking about many, many thousands of businesses that's going to go under. We're talking about many people in the private sector that's going to take pay cuts, people that are lucky enough to have a job. We have to expect exactly the same from the civil service. We have to reduce the size of the civil service. We have to reduce the size of the wage bill. We simply cannot afford to overpay civil service the way that we have been recently. So the first step of the Minister of Finance and priority number one must be to cut back on state spending. Then, of course, we need to do some other things. We must rechannel money to the really needy. Many people, like I said, are going to lose their jobs. We have to support that people one way or the other. But we can only do that if we get some resources by cutting back spending on things that I think we've been spending far too much money on, like, for example, the civil service. So there are many things that can be done. There were some suggestions, for example, to increase the child support grant. That's something I think we can consider. I think it's very important to try to keep especially our small businesses alive as much as we possibly can. Some measures have been put in place, like some tax holidays, an example, and funding from the Unemployment Insurance Fund and various other sources, but that is very small change. So a total new budget by the Minister of Finance, I think, is something that certainly is needed. And the first priority, and we cannot overemphasize this, we have to cut current spending by the state. The state simply cannot take such a huge chunk out of the South African economy. The taxpayers simply cannot carry this burden anymore.
Would you say, Dawie, that is the greatest hindrance to the country's economic resuscitation?
Certainly at the moment. And quite ironically, if we do cut back on state spending, and it's going to happen, whether we like this or not, it is going to happen because we've run out of money. But to really add to the misery of the South African economy, if we cut back on state spending, we will actually deepen the recession in the short term. But we've run out of options now. Economists have been saying and analysts have been saying for years that we have to do something to get the fiscal accounts healthy again. And now that we are in real trouble, now we actually need the state to support the economy, but we simply do not have the capacity to do that anymore. And I'm afraid to cut back on state spending, you are going to get Kusatu all over you if you try to cut back on the wage bill, for example, or the South African Communist Party. And I think you've spoken to them earlier today. They are simply not going to allow that. But let me tell you something, that it is going to happen. We are going to cut back on state spending. And maybe we don't want to cut back on state spending, but the reality is once you've run out of money, there is simply no more money to spend. Rather do this in a structured manner and to talk to your alliance partners and tell them that we literally ran out of money now and that we have to reconfigure this thing that we call the state. And we have to close South African Airways down. And we have to restructure Eskom. We don't have a choice anymore. We do not have the luxury of many options anymore. We are really in deep trouble, and we better start fixing this or it's going to get worse.
I'm not even going to get into those because they are great matters of contention, Dawie. But with South Africa's economy expected to shrink even further, what would be the ways that you could come up, like the low-hanging fruit at the moment, to resuscitate the economy? Because even prior to this pandemic that we are facing right now, our economy was already hemorrhaging for a long time. So how do we resuscitate it?
Well, I think the first steps, of course, will be to contain the virus as most as we possibly can. But I think it's important also to open the debate on whether we should continue with this lockdown. The biggest killer in the world, if you could put malaria and cancer and COVID-19, everything together, there's one killer that is far bigger than all of those illnesses put together, and that is poverty. Poverty kills more people in the world than all illnesses put together. South Africa's life expectancy, for example, is around about 60 years, while wealthy countries' life expectancy is 80 years or more. So what I'm trying to say is this lockdown is having a massive impact on the economy. We have to open the debate on whether we should continue with this lockdown, because it is going to lead to more poverty. And like I've said, poverty is the real killer in the world, and it's going to make misery. We simply is going to add to the misery. But if you're an individual, a couple of things things that you need to know. Try to keep your business going as long as you possibly can. Try to identify the risks in your specific industry wherever you are, and try to manage those kind of risks. And remember, cash is king under these sort of circumstances. Think before you start making decisions like suddenly liquidating your investments, for example. So get a good financial advisor. On the state side, of course, we have to contain the virus as much as we possibly can. We have to look at people's health and so on. But it's also now an opportunity to force through some of these very difficult and unpopular structural adjustments, like getting rid of the state-owned enterprises and making some adjustments like I've mentioned previously. This is going to be difficult, and I think perhaps the most important thing here, and the president has been setting a very good example. I think he's been acting presidential so far, but the president must also tell us that it's going to be very tough. And the president must tell us that it's going to get even tougher, and that we have to follow him, and we're going to get out on the other side better. And unfortunately, I don't hear that from the president. He doesn't want to really share the bad news with us. But the bad news certainly is that the South African economy is going to contract, unemployment will go up, and poverty will go up with that as well. And unfortunately, this will lead to more social and political tension as well.
Dawie, as you say, perhaps this presents an opportunity for realignment, for government to push through some difficult decisions, some unpopular decisions even at this time. And if we look at what's happening elsewhere in the world, a week ago, the Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that his COVID-19 relief program, which will be covered, by the way, by taxing the rich. Is that something that South Africa should be looking at? Is that one option that we should also be exploring as a way to recover?
Everybody's going to be taxed more in future. We somehow, once this is over, the state accounts, like I've mentioned, are totally unsustainable, and we have to repay all this debt of the state somewhere in future. So yes, everybody's going to be taxed more. Will the rich be asked to pay even more taxes? And the answer is probably yes. But we also have to understand, if you look at who's paying what in South Africa, the rich in South Africa are by far the biggest taxpayers in any event. So yes, we can tax the rich even more, but then we're running a risk that the rich is going to stop producing, or the rich is going to move somewhere else and take their production or their skills somewhere else in the world where they are taxed at lower levels. The answer certainly is not to increase taxes. The answer is to make use of money much better, make sure that the state uses money much more efficiently and effectively, stop the wastage, stop spending money on white elephants like South African Airways and things like that. That is far more important than trying to increase the tax burden. Yes, we're all going to pay more taxes, but the reality is that the rich, everybody in South Africa is probably overtaxed, and if you increase taxes too much, you run the risk of creating some other problems in the economy.
Well, Dawie, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Director and Chief Economist of Efficient Group, Dawie Roodt, for talking to us about the current economy and giving us his opinion regarding who South Africa could possibly borrow from, where the money should come from with regard to dealing with the urgent funding that's needed right now, especially against this backdrop of the outbreak of COVID-19. Let's take a quick break.